Now, in the last session, we have seen about creating action function, action support, action region. Now we will be looking at how to define Ajax functionality using the scripting. I have a goal of writing a SQL query, performing a DML operation from Visual Force page. How to make use of JavaScript and write SQL query or DML operations from the JavaScript. So we have soap slash Ajax slash connection.js. If you want to use Ajax-Tool-Kit, in the Visual Force pages, first we are supposed to include connection.js file. If you want to include Ajax-Tool-Kit within the Visual Force pages, we are supposed to include connection.js file. Let me define it. Previously, this format only we used to call as control summa. If I include this connection.js, what was that? Soap slash Ajax slash 46.0 is the version of the API connection.js. So what was this? I'm giving the comments here. Should be included in the VF page to include Ajax-Tool-Kit. Okay. Next, after including it, first I want to get the session ID. Now it is a asynchronous call. Every call that goes JavaScript is asynchronous. Asynchronous call. So we have to authenticate before we request using Ajax-Tool-Kit. So everything that we write here is asynchronous call. Because everything that we write here is an asynchronous call, because everything I write here is a synchronous call. Okay, scripting, right? So before we request any data, we are supposed to authenticate. So how do you authenticate? Pass the session ID. Salesforce dot connection dot session ID equal to get session ID. Salesforce dot connection dot session ID equal to get session ID. This will get the session ID of current user. This will get the session ID of current user. Okay. Now, The question is, I don't want to, okay, let me give it alert S4 dot connection dot review. There's a bug here. Let me check out what is the bug. Get session. Look at this. The session ID of the current user is given. This is one way of getting the session ID. The other way of getting the session ID is, I don't want to log in like a current user. When you don't want to log in like a current user, there is an alternate way. What is the alternate way? I want to connect to some other account. Let us say I want to connect to where result equal to S4 dot connection dot login admin nodes 324.com Salesforce 123. Now this is an open API, so I have given only password. If it is not open API, then I have to give password plus security token. I made that IP as open API. Because I made that IP as open, I am giving only username and password. If that is not open API, I was supposed to give. If that is not open API, I was supposed to give password plus security token. I can give here. If you want to connect to any other Salesforce app, we need to use login. In case if user profile don't have open API, then we need to pass password right. Then I give alert. So go back to the story again, preview. So look at this. If you observe the URL, you're finding it. Salesforce300gmail.com, username A Satish, user ID, username admin nodes at the rate of 324.com. So we are connected to the organization, which is admin 324. We connected to the organization admin 324. So if you want to connect to the same organization, connection dot session ID equal to get session ID. No, I don't want to connect to the same organization. I want to connect to some third-party organization. Then I was supposed to give S4 dot connection dot login. Again, I repeat, if you want to connect to the database of the same organization into which you are logged in, if you want to connect to the database of same organization to which you logged in, then we are going to give S4 dot connection dot session ID equal to get session ID. No, you don't want to connect to the same organization. You want to connect to the some third-party organization and access the data. Then we are going to get S4 dot connection dot login. S4 dot connection dot login admin nodes at the rate of like whatever the username password. Now that user have a restriction on IP address, then we are supposed to give username, password plus security token. If the user doesn't have any IP restriction, straight away username, password. This is to establish the connection with the database to which you want to connect. This is the first story what we have. Let us move on to the next one. Again, I will try to create one more example here. This X2. Somebody is creating a page at the back end. No. Okay. Now, this is how we have. Then I have script on complete. So output label ID equal to right. Now functions. Now we had functions. So now when I say function show, first when I click the button, I want to establish a connection to the organization. Then I want to write a query. How do you write a query? Where query result equal to Salesforce dot connection dot Salesforce dot connection dot query. I wrote a query. After writing a query, I'm trying to print the data what I have, so that you know in which format I'm getting the data. Salesforce dot connection dot query. Select submit. This is the response what I received. Let me take the response. This is our response we got. If you break the response properly, you got done, query locator null, records. Look at the story. This is how we got the data. So what is it? Records we have. Here we have array of records. So we got the data in the form of JSON. When you write a query, any request that goes in the form of Ajax, any request that goes in the form of Ajax to the Apex server, the response will be coming back in the form of JSON. Any request that you make to the Apex from the any request that you make to the Apex, any request that you make to the Apex, any request that you make to the Apex, the response will come in the form of JSON. So if you are getting the response in the form of JSON, we need to deserialize it and use it. We need to deserialize it and use it. So we are trying to deserialize the data and we are trying to use it. Because I don't require all the stuff, I require only array of records. So once you got the data, what I was supposed to do, where records equal query result dot get array of. I am using the word called records because in the result we are getting records. Because the word here is record, I am giving records here. Okay. Then where result equal to query result dot get array of records. Now take a loop where for how do you write a loop in the JavaScript? Where I equal to 0, I less than result dot length. Then I am taking one by one name, adding to the list. Names list equal to right. Now look at the query. This is what write a query. Salesforce dot connection dot query. Result will come. Result fetch only records. Then take one by one record from the array, add. Then I'm giving document dot get page form inner HTML equal to. So go through the code. If anyone is finding any difficulty in understanding the JavaScript function, let me know. From line number 5 to line number 16, if anyone has any difficulty in understanding, let me know. Line number 5 to line number 15, if anybody has any difficulty in understanding, let me know. If anyone has any, yes, Amma, go ahead, Amma.
Session ID we are getting right, expose.connection.session ID, but nowhere it is used.
We have passed the session ID, no, here. Whatever the session ID you are getting, we are assigning to this one, no. See, the S4 dot connection dot is the Ajax-Tool-Kit. To the toolkit we are passing this ID. Because we are passing this ID, it was able to connect to your database. Now it is a JavaScript. It is not a Visual Force. If it's Visual Force, okay, your force.com platform is directly connected. It is a JavaScript call. So JavaScript is going to make a request like a web service call. JavaScript is going to make a request like a web service call. Now, if you are making a request like a web service call, I have to tell to which organization I have to connect. So that's how we have passed get session ID.
Okay, sir.
Right. Any other query from anyone else?
Sir, on the line 16,
Mm-hmm.
so we are getting the name list. Multiple values we are getting in the single variable names list. Can you explain it, sir?
We are adding concatenating the string. See, this is
Okay, so
what.
we can.
Now, see, is it allowed? Let me give you. What is the output? If I give system.debug name, what is the output? What is the output we are going to get? Sham plus.
Sam plus Ram.
The same thing I am doing here.
Okay.
Name list plus best. I am giving a BR so that the data goes to next line.
Okay.
Right, now let me run this program and show you. Have a preview. No, we are getting the data, but unidentified. Maybe it is expecting capital N. It's a case sensitive. We have to manage it. This is how the data has come. List of all the accounts which are there. I am fetching it. Is that was clear? So then, if you are able to
Which one is case sensitive?
come again,
Oh, which one is case sensitive?
the entire JavaScript is case sensitive.
Okay.
It was expecting a capital N. I gave small n, so I couldn't get the data. Okay. Now, if you are able to write a SQL query and you are able to fetch the data from JavaScript, then why are you writing Apex class and SQL queries? If you are able to write a query straight away in the Visual Force, then why you need to go for Apex classes and write it? The answer is using Ajax-Tool-Kit, I can only fetch 200 records, not more than 200 records. First point. Second point, 200 records, each record containing maximum 5 fields. 200 records, each record containing maximum 5 fields. So if you want to, this is the limitation of this. So if you want to work beyond this, you will not be able to achieve it. That's the reason we are going for Apex classes. The advantage of going for Ajax-Tool-Kit is whatever the data we are fetching here using Ajax-Tool-Kit, that is not maintained in the view state. Now, because it's asynchronous call running from the JavaScript, whatever the data we get here, the data will not be maintained in the view state. Let me show you what that view state exception also. Try to understand the story. You get some disturbance, boss. My daughter got up. So
Sorry to disturb you. Like in the earlier example, where did you get that S4 stock? The fifth line,
come
sorry,
again.
sixth line.
S4 dot. It is the Ajax-Tool-Kit.
In the S4.
It is a predefined terminology of Ajax-Tool-Kit.
Okay. So,
I'm just trying to show you the view state.
View state means,
I'm trying to explain the same.
like, what do you mean by view state? Okay.
I'm trying to explain the same, Mama. Give me some time.
Okay.
Now, look at the point. Any data that you are using in the VF page, the data will be first stored in the view state. View state will say hierarchical structure of the page as well as what are the elements which involved in the page, hierarchical structure, and the data what we are using. Any data that we are trying to display in the Visual Force page, any data we are trying to send from Visual Force to Apex class, first that will be stored to view state. View state is like a cache of the page. View state is like a cache memory of the page. So if the data is not found in the view state, then only the data will go to the Apex class and fetch it. First, we will try to see whether data is available in the view state. If it is not there, it goes to the Apex class, fetch the data, get back. So view state is like a cache memory of the page. Any data we want to use in the VF, any data we entered in the VF, first it will be stored to view state. Let me show you this. I got the data. So look at this. See here. 26 accounts are there. You are able to find all the data. So any data that is getting displayed in the VF page, that is first stored in the view state. From the view state, they are going to be displayed. Right. But there is a limitation for the view state. Recently, they increased to 175, if I'm right. 175 KB. Previously, it is 135 KB. Now, recently, they increased to 170 KB. 170 or 175 KB, they increased. Right. So, it cannot take huge amount of data because it is a limited size. That if you are getting a lot of records and trying to display it, because the view state will cross, it throws an exception called view state exception. Because anything that you want to display in the VF page, that should be first fetched and stored to the view state. From the view state, it will be stored because it has a limitation. Recently, the size is increased to around 170, if I'm right. Previously, it was 135 KB. It is increased recently to 170 plus. Let me get the exact limit of view state. Recently, it was increased. (135 KB) to they increased to 170 KB. Yeah. Previously it was 135 kb. Recently they increased to 170 kb. Okay. Now because it has a limited 170 kb, now if you're fetching too much of data, then the view state will not be able to accommodate. It throws an exception. The same thing if I'm running with the Ajax-Tool-Kit. Let me go with the Ajax-Tool-Kit. Look at the view state. Submit. You got the data. Go to the view state. Still there is no data. If you're making an Ajax call and getting the data, whatever the data we're getting through Ajax, the data will not be stored in the view state. Okay, because it's a asynchronous call. Any request that is going through asynchronous, right? Just give me 1 second, boss. Okay. Any request that is going through Ajax, the data will not be stored in the view state. It is also used to avoid the view state exception. But I told you if you want any data to be used quickly, fetch it quickly, instead of going to Apex class, you can straight away get the data from Ajax-Tool-Kit, from JavaScript using Ajax-Tool-Kit. I told you already the limit is 200 records, maximum 5 fields for each record. Right? Right, boss? So this is one of the solution for view state exception also. So what did I do? I wrote a SQL query, I fetched the data, and I was using it. Now go ahead if you have any questions now.
Sir, how do we display large amount of data then? We do fetch, right?
See, now
And displaying.
we need to ensure that there's a reason why the page block table has got 1000 records limit. There's a reason why the data table has 1000 records limit. Okay. Now, in that case, what we need to do, we should not reload each and every. Once you loaded the component, load the components section wise. Load the component section wise. Don't reload the entire functionality. Go with the re-render functionality, or try to avoid using the straightaway invocation of your Apex class method. Use action function, action support, so that they run asynchronously. They avoid a view state, or go with the pagination. Don't load all the records. If I want to display 10,000 records, nobody can read those records. Go with the pagination. Go with the pagination concept, right, Amma? Load them as multiple pages. Go with the pagination concept. Use the asynchronous operation to fetch the data. These are the solutions for it. Got the point?
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Now, let us move on to the next story. Again, we want the next story. Sforce dot connection dot create. Now we want to create a record. Now I want to go for DML operation. So how do you insert the records into database from Ajax-Tool-Kit? I want to insert the data by using Ajax-Tool-Kit. So let us look at the story. So I'll just compare a small story here. How you create a record. Generally, if you want to create a record, how do you create? Now look at the story what I have. Sforce dot first let me take this story. we are taking function. Sure. Then we want to read the value. Generally, if you want to create a record, how do you create? Account ACC equal to new account. This is what we create in the Apex program. The same story, if you want to create in the Ajax-Tool-Kit, we create as var ACC equal to new Salesforce dot S capital O capital account ACC equal to new account. Here we create a var ACC equal to new S4 dot S object account ACC dot name. And making then put all the records into one. Then I want to insert it var result equal to S4 dot connection dot create records. What I'm doing, first I established a connection. Something.
Sir, that script tag.
Yeah. So get the session ID. Then let us insert the data into the data. How we insert? Source dot connection dot. This is to create the record. Right, this is how we got it. Somewhere some line is missing, which is giving P extra. This is how I got it. Now let me invoke from the story. Now we preview. Now I invoke the submit. Go back to accounts and see Ajax1, Ajax2. This is how the data is inserted, right? So we can also insert the data, update the data, delete the data, by using this Ajax-Tool-Kit. How are you making? sforce.connection.create, sforce.connection.update, sforce.connection.delete. We can do all this type of operations from the Ajax-Tool-Kit. I hope everyone followed this point. So my intention was to tell you previously, before the Visual Force came into the picture, from let's say 2005 to 2010, we have only S objects, S controllers. There is no VF. From 2010 to 2015, VF evolved. We started using the VF. Then again, 2015 to 2018, almost 2015 to 2018. I think 2018, you can say end of 2018. So initially, we used to build everything using the S controls only. The VF started in the beginning of my career. We don't have this Visual Force and all this stuff. I used to work on this I used to work on S controllers only. I'll show one of my oldest project in the beginning of my career. We don't have Visual Force and all this stuff at the time. We used to build everything using S controller. To just give an awareness of how this S controller can be used. Now we are not using S controller, but we are using the same S controller in the JavaScript to improve the performance. If you want to reduce the load time, if you want to improve the performance of the page, still we can use those same S controller functionality in the JavaScript, in the VF page. Look at this. So this was the beginning stage of my projects. So if you look at this, the entire application was built. This entire application was built using S controllers only. There is no Visual Force. From 2010, slowly the Visual Force components started growing up. If you look at this, entire project was built. All these functionalities, whatever you're using, updating overriding the standard pages, updating the standard pages, building any custom functionality, any functionality that you take, all these are Ajax-Tool-Kit. So initially, the complete functionalities were built. All the functionalities are built using S controller. Whatever the project we had, everything was built using S controller. Look at this point: apex.js, connection.js. So initially, the entire functionalities were built using S controllers. Internally, the S controllers is working on Ajax-Tool-Kit. Whatever the Ajax-Tool-Kit I'm saying, the same Ajax-Tool-Kit was used initially to build this S controllers. Now slowly we introduce. Now even today, if you want any scripting action to run, let us say I have a button here. I click on a button. When I click on the button, we don't want any VF page to load. We want some action to be performed. This is one of the standard functionality. When I click on this button, I don't want any VF page to be called, but still some action should be performed. Then how will you invoke? When I click on the button, we don't want to call any VF page, but still we want some action to be performed. We go with Ajax-Tool-Kit. A quick rough example, we'll be discussing this down the line, but when I go for extraction concept, I'll be giving it. Just for understanding purpose, I'm giving. Right. On click JavaScript. Here we read JavaScript. What JavaScript? Ajax-Tool-Kit. We use Ajax-Tool-Kit JavaScript and build it. So we create buttons, we override the buttons by using the Ajax-Tool-Kit, so that without opening any VF pages, we'll be able to perform some action. You want some action to be performed without opening any VF pages. Right. So this is how we are getting. We'll see that point of Ajax-Tool-Kit when you go for extensions. Okay. Right now, I just want to convey, we can write a SQL query or DML from Ajax-Tool-Kit. Right, Amma? Next, let us move on to the next story. Just give me 1 minute, boss. Okay. Now we have this folder here, images. So let me use this story. How to load the static resources, setup, build, develop, static resources, new static resource. Choose the file. See. This is how we got it. This is a single file. I'm also uploading a zip file. Build, develop, static resource, new. Right. Here I want to upload this file. I'm uploading the images. So this is how the static resources are included. Now the point is, I included one individual file, I included one zip file. How to refer to the data when it is a single file? How to refer to the file when it is a zip file? So look at the story. Apex image value equal to dollar resource dot resource name. Resource name I give it as first. If you want to refer to the static resource, dollar resource dot resource name. Dollar resource dot resource name. If you want to refer to the static resource, dollar resource dot resource name. Dollar resource dot resource name. Because it's a single file, we are going to get dollar resource dot resource name. Then I can give width and height. First, let us see whether file is running properly or not. have a preview. Look at this. So whatever the static resource we uploaded, the static resource we are getting. Now the static resource what we uploaded is a single file. The static resource what I uploaded is a single file. We are trying to upload the single file here. In case if it is zip means what? Group of files are there. In case if there are group of files, how do you include it? Apex image value equal to apex image value equal to URL file. Here I am going to give dollar resource dot. What is the name of the resource we had? Test. Then we have a path images slash right. Okay. So what is the extension we had here? PNG file. Okay. Slash images dot PNG. Right. What is the file? My dot PNG. So we are supposed to give URL for a resource. Any closing mistake here? Resource. This is how we are getting it. Right. Now what was that? If it is a static resource, if it is a static resource, if it is a single file, straight away we are going to use dollar resource dot source. If it is a zip file, URL for dollar resource dot source name, comma path. In the zip, what is the path we have? So this is how we included static resources within the Visualforce page. Now, why did we come across this static resource? If you want to include any external CSS file, any external JavaScript file within the Salesforce, then we have to upload that external JavaScript file or static resources or external JavaScript file or external CSS files in the Salesforce as a static resource. Let us take an example. I want to include jQuery. When you want to include a jQuery in the Salesforce, now I have a requirement like this. I want to include jQuery. If you want to include jQuery, softwares, I want to include the jQuery. If you want to include the jQuery within the Salesforce, what you are supposed to do? I want to include this jQuery. So if you want to include the jQuery, first get the jQuery file, download it from it. I'll show you from where you can download it. So download jQuery UI 1.9.2 custom. I had some old version. If you want to download the latest version, you can download it. I have old version of 1.9.2. I think we have a lot of new versions. You can download that new version. Now I want to include this jQuery within the Visualforce. Now the jQuery will be coming to you as a bundle. The jQuery will be coming to you as a bundle. When it is coming to you as a bundle, we are supposed to include this jQuery bundle within your Salesforce. Now the jQuery is coming to you as a bundle. When the jQuery is coming to you as a bundle, I want to include the jQuery within the Visual Force space. So what I'm doing here, first I'll rename it because I have to use this name always. So I'll give some shortcut name jQuery. Zip it. Only the purpose of changing the name is I have to use the same name number of times. To avoid lengthy names, I just renamed it. Now what I'm doing, including the jQuery in the static resource. How do you include? Setup, build, develop, we have static resources here. What was the static resource? jQuery. I included the jQuery in the Salesforce as a static resource. So you download the jQuery, you get a bundle. So you download a jQuery, you get a bundle. Okay, all the bundle contains all the JavaScript predefined JavaScript file CSS. Basically, what is the jQuery? It's a predefined JavaScript framework. It's a JavaScript framework where you have some predefined functionality. Instead of you writing every functionality, they have defined all the frequently used functionality and giving you as a framework. So because it's a framework, I'm including entire JavaScript files and CSS files within my Salesforce here. Once I included the static resource, now what should I do? I have to include these static resources in the VF page and use it. So let us see how to include these static resources. Listen carefully, Emma. Listen carefully. Listen carefully. It's a lengthy procedure. Listen carefully. Apex, include script value equal to URL dollar resource dot. What is the name of the resource again? jQuery. Right. Then we had a jQuery folder. In that we have a JS folder. Come back to the story. jQuery folder, JS folder. The JS folder we have this. Include all the JS files. Similarly, next one. Value equal to similarly I have whatever the scripting files are there, include those scripting files. Right. So all these are predefined JavaScript files which are defined by jQuery. So we are including jQuery predefined this is how we create. Now, if it is image, you know whether image is working or not. Now, when it is a scripting file, how do you know whether the files are loaded properly or not? If it is image, when I run the page, if image is coming, yes, my path is right. If image is not coming, path is not right. But when you are including a scripting, how do you know whether files are included properly or not? So we have to test it. So how do you test it? First, let me test it. I'll explain the line by line. We can give anything. We can give $J equal to jQuery dot. No conflict. If $, I'll explain why I have taken this. Okay, first let us see what is the message we are getting. I'll explain it. Have a preview. Reading is success. Okay. Now listen to the story. Now listen, boss. Every jQuery statement will start with the dollar $. In the scripting, all the jQuery statements will start with the dollar. Dollar document, dollar create. Everything will start with the dollar. Now all these jQuery statements will start with the dollar. When all the jQuery statements are starting with the dollar, I have a problem in the Salesforce. In the Visual Force page, we are using a dollar here. When I said dollar, it's a global data. When I said the dollar, it's a global data. But in the scripting, when I'm using a dollar, it is saying global. When it's saying global data, in some cases it is saying jQuery. So whenever I'm using a dollar, I have an issue. What is the issue? Is it a global data or is it a jQuery statement? According to the scripting, dollar means jQuery. According to the Visual Force, dollar means static resource. So whenever I use dollar symbol here, now we have an issue here. Whether the dollar is replicating, whether the dollar is indicating jQuery, or whether the dollar is indicating global data. As we have an issue there, global data or jQuery, there is a conflict. So to remove this conflict, I was using $. I told boss, in place of dollar, I'm going to replace my operation with a $. Why? Because when you say dollar, it's a global data. When you say dollar, it's a global data. When you say dollar, it's a jQuery. So when I read a dollar, what was that? Is it a jQuery or static resource? To avoid this problem, we are removing the dollar symbol in the jQuery with $. That's how I gave $. Equal to jQuery dot no conflict. If this functionality is working properly, these files are loaded properly. That's what I want to convey. If this function is running properly, the files are loaded properly. I'll give the basic information one more time. Try to get. We're a bit fast in covering this topic. I'll repeat the point one more time. Beta. Go inside. Go inside. Go inside on the bedroom TV. Go. Okay. Now we have here jQuery. First, download the file. Zip file will be downloaded. download the jQuery file. A zip file will be downloaded. Okay. Now the zip file contains JavaScript, CSS, and others. Now, what is the jQuery basically? It is a JavaScript framework. What is the JavaScript framework? Generally, whatever the functionalities we are using, those functionalities generally whatever the functionalities we are using in JavaScript, those functionalities are predefined in the jQuery. So if you want to use this jQuery, in Salesforce, if you want to use this jQuery in the Salesforce, what we are supposed to do? We have to include the zip file what we downloaded into the static resource. Because I want to use this jQuery, in the Visual Force, whatever the zip file we downloaded, the zip file should be included in the Visual Force. How you include? Create the static resource, upload the zip file. Because the file is a zip file, what I'm doing? URL for $resource dot source name path here. URL for $resource dot resource name path here given. That's how I created. We'll discuss the jQuery in the next session. Okay. Just to give an example of static resource, I've given this. We'll see how to include them and how to work with the jQuery in the next session. Right. That's all from my end. Tomorrow we'll continue with the jQuery. And all the people, tomorrow class will be online only. So once